The saw killer of Hanover killed 6 people in the 1970s and left their body parts in public places. All victims are unidentified and there are no suspects. "13 body parts belonging to 4 women and 2 men were found in the German city of Hanover in the 1970s. All of the victims apparently died recently and the cause of death was not determinable in most cases. The bodies were sawn up and always deposited on Saturdays at public places 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, around the Lake Masksee where the police headquarters of Hanover are so they would be found. The biggest obstacle for the police was that they could not determine the identity of the victims even though the police was able to find out about age, height and gender of most of the victims and take fingerprints in some cases. One victim even had an extraordinary tattoo and another one was determined to have given birth to at least 1 child. However, no people that fit the descriptions were reported missing. To this day, the time of the crimes, the perpetrator and the identity of the victims are unknown and there are no recent developments in the case. According to the police, the killer can be described as the following. He was working from Monday until Friday every week. He is either a doctor or a butcher because he was able to saw up the bodies in a precise way. He is highly pathological. He refrigerated the dead bodies and deposited them from a car. His motive was to make the people in Hanover live in fear. Hoax theory. The newspapers reported about an active serial killer, but a popular belief at the time was that the findings of the body parts were a prank by medical students with access to dead bodies, employees of a crematorium or a guy who digged up the bodies on a graveyard. That would explain why the victims couldn't be identified. The police took the theory into consideration and tested if it was possible to steal corpses in crematoriums or to refrigerate recently buried bodies from the graveyard to hide the real time of death. They came to the conclusion that it could be possible but is rather unlikely. The police finally considered the theory debunked when they were able to determine suffocation and violence as the cause of death for the last 2 victims. Let me go home. It was a December night in 2003. A 19-year-old woman in Montgomery disappears, and a few weeks later her mother receives a mysterious message with an unidentified voice in the background. Where is LaQuanta Riley? Background. LaQuanta Nashelle Riley was born February 26, 1984 to a teenaged Pamela Riley. Due to Pamela's young age, LaQuanta was raised by her aunt, though LaQuanta and Pamela retained a good, active relationship throughout the years. LaQuanta would come to be the older sister to 5 younger siblings, one of whom passed away in the mid-1990s. LaQuanta was a bright, hard-working young woman who loved music and cooking. She even played the clarinet in middle and high school. Pamela described her daughter as bubbly, full of life. In 2002, LaQuanta graduated from Redden High School with honors and had received a full college scholarship, with her eyes set on a career in forensic science. In 2003, LaQuanta moved into an apartment with a roommate in Eufaula, Alabama up until Thanksgiving season. It was around this time that LaQuanta had an argument with her roommate, but the details of this disagreement are unknown. On December 5, LaQuanta came back to her apartment to gather her belongings and called her mother to ask for a ride. However, Pamela was unable to pick her up. LaQuanta made more calls for help until she was able to move in with her aunt and cousin in Montgomery. The disappearance. It was December 7, 2003, at around 11:30 p.m., in Montgomery, Alabama. LaQuanta left the home in a dark green car with 4 doors, described as possibly either a Ford Taurus or Chevrolet Caprice. The driver took her to her mother's house to go get a jacket. It was LaQuanta's brother who answered the door, and he asked LaQuanta who was driving the car. LaQuanta assured him that they were a friend she met around the neighborhood. Soon LaQuanta got back into the car, and she never returned home. She had left behind her purse and money. 3 days after that night, Pamela reported her daughter missing. Sometime after LaQuanta's disappearance, sources vary on when, at most, it was a few weeks after, Pamela received a call on her answering machine. It was unclear what the caller said, as it was either "leave me alone" or "let me go home." A male voice was heard in the background saying LaQuanta's name, and that was where the call ended. Pamela believes that the young woman in the message was LaQuanta. Still, the call had never been traced. A lead was found afterward when police discovered that LaQuanta's name was being used on an apartment in Stone Mountain, Georgia, a location noted for being the same area that LaQuanta had graduated high school. Pamela visited the apartment and spoke to a resident there, showing him a picture of her daughter. The resident said that LaQuanta had lived down the hall from him and had asked to use his phone after an argument she had. Unfortunately, the resident also said that LaQuanta had moved out just a few days before Pamela arrived at Stone Mountain. Aftermath. Pamela Riley Bolden and the rest of LaQuanta's family are still holding out hope that LaQuanta is still alive and out there. Pamela arranges a yearly candlelight vigil to remember the intelligent, compassionate woman, sister, and daughter named LaQuanta Nashelle Riley. Pamela has gone on to form the Riley Relief Foundation, a non-profit organization that provides local support for the families of missing loved ones in Alabama. "We're going to be the voices for them," Pamela Riley named LaQuanta Nashelle Riley. Pamela has gone on to form the Riley Relief Foundation, a non-profit organization that provides local support for the families of missing loved ones in Alabama. "We're going to be the voices for them," Pamela Riley believed that her daughter is still alive until God allows her to know something different. Who was the person in the car? Who was the man in the call? These are only two of the questions in LaQuanta's case that are still unanswered even after who killed Jason Barkhouse and mutilated his body while he slept next to his partner who almost was murdered as well. A case with so many questions and no answers. Halifax, NS. Who was he? Jason Barkhouse was born the 29th of October in 1952. At the age of 19, he got married to a girl named Valerie. He and his wife lived in a small house in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He soon after built a house down the street that they moved into to start a family. They had a son first. Unfortunately, he passed away at 7 months. They next had a daughter named Melissa. She was terribly ill as a toddler, but miraculously she survived. When Melissa was about to turn 3, Valerie left them. Jason was left to raise Melissa alone. His mother stepped in and helped raise Melissa. Shortly after, he met a girl named Fern Casey. She was married to his friend beforehand, and after they had went their separate ways, Jason and Fern moved into together. Life was good for a while. However, things didn't stay like this. Even after this horrible story, his daughter Melissa died 12 years later. Jason's death and murder still remains unsolved. What happened? On the night of June 25 in 1980, Jason and his girlfriend Fern headed to bed. It was a normal night, nothing out of the ordinary. The next thing Fern remembers was being woken in the early hours of the morning of June 26. She thought the basement step had creaked, and she tried to wake Jason up to no avail. She saw a man enter the room, and then she was knocked unconscious. Her alarm clock woke her up later, and Fern got up and got dressed. She walked across the road to her neighbor's house, trying to grasp what had just happened. Her neighbor was actually Jason's aunt named Judy. Fern had a head wound, and was bleeding from the back of her head. She was groggy. She asked Albert, who was Judy's partner, to go check on Jason. He was in the driveway when Fern arrived. Fern arrived, fixing their daughter's car so she could get to work. Fern told him she couldn't wake him. Albert agreed to go over and check whilst Fern headed inside and saw just, and laid down on the couch. Albert called out to his son Blair to go over with him and investigate, and they crossed the street. When Blair entered, he went to the bedroom. There, on the floor, Jason's body lay mutilated and dead. There was blood everywhere. Blair ran back and police were called. Fern was taken to the hospital and lived. The doctors had said that if the alarm clock had not woken her up, she would have bled to death in an hour. The injury she received on her head caused her to have memory loss, and there wasn't anything else she could recall from the night. Examining her, the doctors found a dent on her from trying to shield off an attacker. Whatever she had been attacked with was a round object, and from the left side of her skull to her forehead her skin had been scraped. Her skull actually had to be cut to relieve pressure. Her injuries actually caused her to lose her scent and taste and had balance issues for years. The authorities investigated, and found the murderer had come in through the kitchen. Fern said that she and Jason had been outside that evening and it was possible that they had left the door unlocked. The killer left through the basement and left a smear of blood on the door. They used dogs to try and find the killer but had recently rained, and this came up with nothing. However, the dog did reach as far as the lake that they lived by. Jason's body was badly mutilated. There was severe injuries to his genitals, suggesting that the attack was personal. A few months prior, Jason had also been assaulted.